Hello and welcome, dear viewers. You are watching our English service from Amhara Mass Media Agency. And here it starts our weekly edition ATV special. And I am Zelalem Ibeltal with the program. Dear viewers, as you all remember, before the new reform, which has been started in April 2018, Ethiopia was deemed as one of the most censored nations in the world. Ethiopia media industry was also in a dire state. Freedom of the press was violated by the government of Ethiopia. And this was a hard and solid fact, which was proven by so many international organizations, such as Human Rights Watch, Committee to Protect Journalists, CPJ, and other similar organizations. However, after the coming of the new Prime Minister, His Excellency Dr. Abiy Ahmed, Ethiopia media industry has started to grow. And to mention some of the manifestation of this growth, some media organizations which were banned and often labeled as terrorist organizations were allowed to broadcast. Such positive moves by the government of Ethiopia was recognized by so many international organizations. And following this, the 2019 World Press Freedom Day was celebrated in Ethiopia, Addis Ababa. And this was for the first time in the history of our nation.
Media landscape in Ethiopia and freeing imprisoned journalists led the country to host the World Press Freedom Day in the African soil for the second time. African Union Commission communicated head Wayne Musabaina lauded Ethiopia, said, "We are very proud in terms of the progress that has been made. Ethiopia has climbed 40 places up the press freedom ladder," she said, and added, "This is a remarkable progress over a few years." Musabaina pointed out that those African countries should learn from each other and exchange experience, such as the progress in Ethiopian media landscape.
However, such media freedom, such media liberalization was once tested when the government tries to close some media organizations. The government highly argues that it is forced to do so because those media organizations were instigating conflict between and among peoples of Ethiopia. And of course, there is nothing important than keeping the peaceful coexistence of nations, nationalities, and peoples of Ethiopia. But the question is, where is the true cause of the problem? And what is the right path? And what is the solution to establish and strengthen free and responsible media? Free and at the same time responsible media. To discuss on some of these critical issues of our time, I invited a guest from the University of Bahar Dar. So my guest is Associate Professor Jemal Muhamed, who is lecturer of journalism and communication at the University of Bahar Dar. Associate Professor Jemal Muhamed, many thanks for coming here and much glad to see you here in the studio.
Thank you for having me.
Would I start the interview by assessing your evaluation of the state of Ethiopian media after the new reform?
Okay, thank you. I think maybe better to see briefly what type of media landscape we had before the reform, because it is the result of, in some way, it is the result of the past that we have now.
Sure.
Before the reform, the Ethiopian media was criticized for being highly polarized. That means the state media were used as a propaganda machine and just praising what the government has said and what the government has done. And we have another media scenario where the private media denounce what the government has said and has done. That media landscape was highly oppressed by the government. So based on this, when we come to the reform, after the reform, we have that type of propaganda or that type of culture in the mind setup of the journalists. You have to work in favor of someone else and or against someone else. This is what polarization is. So there is no middle way, a middle ground that you can play. So because of this, Ethiopian journalism was a victim of polarization. Because of the new reform, the media are now free, and we can say that they are relatively exercising their freedom of expression, and that is the positive side of the new reform. But that polarization exists now, but in a very different form, as I said it, and in a very complicated form. Journalism is now a victim of activism. So, and this activism is also highly affected by an ethnic ideology. So we have polarization, and that polarization is affected by the ideology of ethnicism, and journalism is actually highly mixed up with with activism. So it is very hard to know which is journalism and which is activism when you come to programs. Even in the state media, within the state media, whether it is regional media or the national media, it is very hard to know that this is really a pure journalism. So activism is highly influencing the Ethiopian journalism. So I think I can say that Ethiopian journalism is victimized by activism, and this activism also becomes highly influenced by the ethnic ideology, and this leads to, as we witnessed, to different violation of human rights and conflicts around different regions, including Addis Ababa. So, so the activists has an ideology of this ethnic orientation, and this ethnic orientation is leading to different conflicts in the name of freedom of expression. Therefore, I think we are in a state of confusion. Journalists are in a state of confusion. I don't think that even state media journalists are working based on their ethical guidelines. They are respecting guidelines. Even I was watching last night by Amhara mass media, which is talking about the Amhara values, but this will also open for interpretations, negative interpretations. By the other side, you know, the problem when journalists present a certain thoughts or idea, it doesn't mean that they should not talk about that, but they do not present the other version of the story. That is the problem. That makes it a complete propaganda and activism when they speak just only about one side of a story. That is the main problem. That is the main problem, and that's the main reason for much of the conflicts that we are witnessing in our country now. They stick to only one version of story because they are activists. So it is harder to say that they are working as a journalist. Even the journalists themselves, I'm not saying that it is activists. Activists are, yes, they have playing their own role, and they have some media they established. That's another problem. But even the state media journalists are working as an activist for a certain viewpoint or group, and this is the most dangerous aspects of the reforms that we have now.
Can we say that Ethiopian media are using the freedom of speech after the new reform?
The problem, yes, it is freedom, but that freedom is detached from responsibility. That's the problem. So journalism is actually freedom of expression is actually something that's related with a certain type of responsibility. There is no freedom without responsibility. Journalists must take a certain responsibility when they exercise their freedom. So that's the problem. So freedom is something very relative. So there is no a complete, an absolute freedom. There is no absolute freedom.
What are the pros and cons of media liberalization or freedom of speech in Ethiopia, given that the media literacy level of the society is low?
When you come to the advantages, now we are exercising a better freedom, and I think that's also very important. People are expressing their ideas. Those suppressions are now banned by the government, and this is very interesting. That's very, very basic and very important. But the problem, some of the media, maybe better to say, exercising it without taking any responsibility. So that's the problem. And now we are witnessing a lot of problems, conflicts, violence in some of the regions. And this is really the main player here is the media, especially the social media, because it is very fast and maybe easily accessible by the community, I mean, by some literate people. So this creates the major problem. So everything is related to what the media is doing without taking any responsibility and without exercising journalistic ethical standards. That's the problem. If journalists exercise those ethical standards, I think if they were exercising it, we couldn't have much of the problems that we have now, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. So what should be the role of civic organizations to support the creation of free and responsible media in Ethiopia?
The main important thing that we need to do is to train journalists how to exercise their freedom with responsibility. And the civil organizations can give short-term trainings for journalists. But in the long term, I think we need to think of about to reform the media ownership that we have in the country. Now, if you look at the media ownership that we have now, it is based on ethnic orientation. So the Amhara have the Amhara media, the Tigrayans have the Tigray media, the Oromo have the Oromo media, and you will have a private Amhara media, a private Oromo media. These things facilitates a very fertile ground for journalists' orientation, mind setup, to work just only for one ethnic group. But journalism is an international profession. It is a borderless profession. It does not border. Journalism does not border. It serves humanity. It serves the public. So it should be reformed, reorganized. This is the way out. The way out. This is the minimum we need to do. This type of orientation will take us to conflicts as we have witnessed now. So we need to have a type of journalism that is based on public service. So we need to have a public service journalism. That means journalism that serves the interests of the public, not the interests of a certain group or activists, not a political party. That serves first and foremost the public. Okay, so we need to have this type of reform in the Ethiopian media ownership.
Okay. The problem in Ethiopia media is lack of responsibility. So I think you guys, media scholars, have great responsibilities. So what should they do to strengthen responsibility in the media?
The responsibility is not only for scholars or for school of journalism or for the government. It is for all of us, including the media itself. Including the society itself, actually, if we have, a very ethical people, a very ethical young people, a very ethical old people, we'll have an ethical media. We'll have an ethical expert in economics, an ethical expert in health, whatever. So ethics is highly related to the culture that we have, actually. So it may be, but to make it more practical, we may need to revisit our curriculum that we have first in journalism, in the School of Journalism. That we have, the curriculum that we have is a type of curriculum that was designed to serve the existing government, EPRDF at that time. But after the new reform, we need to have, because curriculum is not static. it should be dynamic and change it based on the interests of the society. So now this is what the society is demanding now, is a type of journalism that can serve the public, not the activist, not a political party, not the government. So to have this type of journalism, to have this type of media in Ethiopia, we need to revisit our curriculum. We need to redesign the curriculum so that journalists may get, the important skill that will help them to exercise their freedom of expression with responsibility.
I think the willingness and the commitment of the government in this regard is very essential. So what should the government do to create responsible media?
This ethnic line type of media establishment should be changed in a way that it can serve the public. But the problem, the way that the regional media are established is in line with the way the regions are formulated, and they are formulated based on ethnic lines. This may be the problem, but if we try to establish a type of media within the regions to make them a public service journalist, to make them a public service broadcasting, I think this will be the first step that the government needs to reform the media in Ethiopia. This is my suggestion. This is also one of my research area where I suggested that the best way out, at least from the media point of view, we have to detach the media from the government, but it has to be owned by the public. It was owned by the state for the last 20, 30 years, 50 years. We have seen the results. So maybe better to have a media that is based on, established based on public broadcasting, which is based on the ownership of the public. It will be organized based on a certain board, which have no attachment or affiliation to a political party, opposition political party, or to the ruling party. It should be detached from all this type of interests or from the commercial interests. So if we manage to establish that type of media, I think this will be the first step to have a journalist who are serving the public, not a certain group. That group may be a political group, maybe an activist, maybe an ethnic interest, whatever. We have to make it free from this type of conflict of interests. So that's my suggestion or my recommendation, so that we can have a media that can see the country as a whole and the public as a whole, not as a fragmented public based on ethnic basis or whatever different interests. That's my recommendation.
What do you say about the importance of practicing peace journalism in the current states of Ethiopian politics?
It's very essential, but the problem when journalists understand peace journalism, the way they understand peace journalism is very problematic. That's the problem. Even when you talk about media ethics, the way journalists understand media ethics is very simplistic. They think about, just about balance. If Mr. A complains about Mr. B, you need to go to Mr. B and add it. Yes, this is also, but this is very elementary. But journalism ethics is more than that. And peace journalism is not about just reporting about peace. No, it's not like that. But journalists understand like that. So they go on the street and make a vox pop. And what do you think about peace? What do you understand peace? So people speak about peace. So this is not peace journalism. This is propaganda journalism. This is a purely propaganda journalism. it's not about asking peace, but peace journalism is about looking, critically the problems within the society, so that if there is injustice, if there is corruption, if there is maladministration, if there are any resentments within the society, you need to go and report it, so that measures can be taken before that thing becomes a very big problem, people becomes violent. We have a lot of violence in Ethiopia. Why? Because we do not exercise peace journalism or ethical journalism. So the problem, we understand journalism. That's the problem. The way we understand journalism is very problematic. That's the problem. If you practice, for example, strictly the journalistic standards, codes of ethics, you will exercise peace journalism, because you will reflect the problems of the public. But in the media, much of the media, you can tally, you can see and tally overnight, this evening, for example, or maybe you can see 3 months reports. You will find that they are just flat, one-sided. And now we have state media, but they are not free from propaganda. That's the problem. Propaganda is very important in some areas, but in much of the areas we don't want to have propaganda. We have a balanced story that looks every dimension, because truth is multiple. We have truth is multiple. So it is not only one dimension, but when you look at the stories, they are presenting one version of the story. This is the major problem in much of the stories, in much of the conflicts. So they just look a certain part of a story, and that's from one side. No one opposes if you present anybody's idea, which maybe looks like very hard. It's not a problem. But the problem, you do not include the other version of the story. So this is what peace journalism is also. So peace journalism is very important, but are we really exercising it in the right way? Development journalism is also very important. But the way we exercise development journalism is actually it's a propaganda journalism. Even the way development journalism was exercised in Ethiopia it's a PR journalism, a PR or journalism. In Ethiopia, we have witnessed that PR experts were writing news stories. They were acting as a journalist. So journalism is actually lost somewhere in Ethiopia. It's lost somewhere. Activists, snatched it, and they appear as if they are journalists. PR, they took it, and they appear as if they are journalists. Who are the journalists in Ethiopia? Somewhere it's lost. So that's the problem. That's why we do not have ethical journalists. That is why we do not have developmental journalists. That's why we do not have journalists that report according to the basic principles of peace journalism. Okay? So peace journalism is not about forgetting the conflict. It's not about, living or outplaying the conflict. No. We need to bring it. If not, it will be like burying, like the problem, and it will burst some time in the future.
Okay. So let me take you to another important idea in journalism, and that's about media literacy. How do you think, and what do you suggest about rising the media literacy level of the society?
Media literacy, before that we need to have literate society. People must able write and read. But we have a significant number of people who are illiterate in Ethiopia, or less educated. So this less educated society must get a certain type of, we need to lift this level of education somewhere. And that, after that, we can teach people about media literacy. Because media literacy is about critically evaluating the message that comes to you through the media. But this critical evaluation needs a skill and experience so that you can deconstruct that story. Much of the information, especially much of the opinions, almost all of the opinions that come through the media are constructs. And we have a lot of conflicts because we do not able to deconstruct that the story, I mean, the information or the opinion or the point of view that comes through the media. Our skill, the skill of our society is very much weak to deconstruct the information that comes through the media. So to develop this, I think we need to have, we need to lift, to scale up people's level of education, one. And then media literacy has to be given as a subject, starting from the elementary school. This is what the developed countries are doing. So everything that comes through the media is a construct so that they can deconstruct it. So that means to ask why this person is saying this and why now, what he said before, why he didn't say it before, okay? So they can deconstruct it. And then they can think twice before they may take any measure or before they trust that information is really true. That's why fake news is, shocking, shaking our country. It's disturbing our nations because people taking that fake story as if it is true. So this is, media literacy is very, very important. But we need to think and to incorporate this into our curriculum so that people's, especially the young people, ability and capacity to evaluate informations can be in a very good level so that they can differentiate between the bad and the good from the information that comes for them, because now we are living in a very information saturated society. So media literacy is very, very important. Okay. And that is one of the weak side of our society, and that is something manipulated by much of the activists to propagate very negative ideas about the other group of the society.
Okay, might be my final question, and this one is more of general question. Don't you think that today is better than yesterday as far as media development is concerned in Ethiopia?
Today is better from yesterday, and it is unquestionable that we are in a better position now. Even I couldn't give this type of interview with journalists except in my class. I couldn't speak openly in the media like this, criticizing what the government is doing or whatever, because there was no that type of freedom of expression. So no doubt about that. But the problem is the way we are handling it. The way you are handling it. We need to have, you need to have, knife is very important. You need to cut it. But it's also very dangerous, okay? It is also a very dangerous tool. This media is like that. It's very, very important, and now it is free, but the way we are using it is actually went in the wrong way. We have to come to the right track, but about the goodness of the time is, I think, no doubt about that.
Okay. Associate Professor Jemal Muhamed, many thanks for your time and for your recommendation and critical insights regarding our topic of discussion. And I hope I will see you in another show. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Dear viewers, that brings us to the end of our program for today. And please do stay with the rest of the programs.